The Story of Ida and Thomas, Mother and Son, 10th Century Germany. By Alan Lee Whiteman, August 2025. Ida as the mother, an earlier incarnation of Caroline, lived for 55 years. Thomas as Ida's first son, an earlier incarnation of Alan, lived for 38 years. Abstract, Ida and son Thomas, pronounced Thomas, live in a village of a fiefdom located in present-day eastern Germany in the vicinity of Wörnitz in modern-day Bavaria. The story takes place in the 10th century where fiefdoms populated the areas, each having some degree of royalty, military, the Catholic Church and clergy, merchant classes, and a larger population of peasants or serfs. There was great social stratification with little opportunity for one born into one class to improve themselves and advance upwards. Many people worried about safety and stability in a time where neighboring states to the east, such as the Hungarians or the Ottomans, might decide to invade, kill, enslave, and conquer at will. In this story, Ida is born into a merchant class family where there are older brothers, a living mother and father, and a few other merchant class families in the same village. The father Hans was a bit of a show-off and all knew this. Hans was proud of his status as a merchant dealing in exchange of clothing goods, farming tools, and some specialty items brought in from surrounding fiefdoms and sold at a profit to local peasants and other merchant class families. Hans had a bit of an ego which he liked to flaunt off to others, a bit crass at times. Regular people knew what his real status was, and when Hans tried to equate himself with the local royalty, the village people laughed at him behind his back. But still, he and his wife supported a family, and in time a daughter Ida was born and became the last of the children and the only daughter. Ida came into life with a set of constraints. Daughters were born to be wives when the time came, and the focus was for the daughter to help bring in wealth to the family, and that was that. In those times of tight caste system, a daughter has one real job, and that was to be married off to a promising young man who would hopefully add wealth to the family. Ida over time felt she had some kind of entitlement and a certain amount of prestige, as merchants were better well off financially and had more security than the local peasants. Ida's family had a nice house in comparison to shacks or huts lived in by the serfs, but her parents' house was hardly anything like that of a castle or anything of that nature. When Ida was born, her incarnation intention was to see things as being equal in life, to begin to let go of the ideas of superiority or inferiority, or that of better and that of worse. And to also begin to work on some kind of self-reliance for her own self. At least that was the intent. Also the incarnating intent was for this life to be that of a struggle when the personality began to take over in later life. But at the same time, from the soul's perspective, everything was within perfection, regardless of the nature of the family life or how things turned out later on. As Ida grew older through childhood, she began to get prepared to become that of a wife to some other merchant. Within that life, or potentially, she could get married to maybe somebody within the military or somebody higher in the military, such as a captain or a general or so forth. Ida took in this stance as there was no other real options for her, as their society forced her and other like daughters to follow that particular path. As Ida grew up through the childhood years, the only education that she received was being that of a wife, being married to somebody who would take care of her. Also her own born children, some male who would take care of her in later life and would provide safety and security and so forth. So that was the basic plan for herself. And again, there was nothing else that Ida could really do in that kind of situation, because daughters could only play so many roles. Now in contrast, Ida could join the Catholic Church and become that of a nun or something like that. But that of the parents and the mother would discourage such things because there was no money in it. There was no safety, there was no security. There was no building up the family wealth. And that's how that the father and the mother saw the children as ones who later on would help take care them, when the parents got much older. Around the age of 15, Ida got married to the son of another merchant, where the focus of the marriage relationship was about stability. The marriage was not so much about attraction or physical appearance, but about safety and stability in a world where such was not always guaranteed. Within a year of the marriage, Ida and her husband Blas bore a son Thomas, being Alan of present-day incarnation, and so begins this story, which progresses through living, individual deaths, and a great span of time, until they both reincarnate and connect through modern-day technology of websites. Thomas was brought up in the same situation, the very same family, so to speak. His incarnation for that particular lifetime, in some ways, was somewhat similar to that of the mother, but maybe with a little bit more evolution within this particular area. In other words, Thomas was beginning to move forward with the intention of understanding that his own self-worth was more than that of the things that he had. He had the understanding that the idea of position or wealth comes from the outer world rather than coming from that of the inner world. So when he was born, both Thomas and Ida had a good affinity with that of each other. Ida did try hard to be what was considered to be a good mother. She was very proud because the firstborn was a male and the local culture considered this to be better than the birth of a daughter. For the son was often considered to be the inheritor of the family business and be more apt to take care of the Ida and Hans in their older age. Ida got too involved in showing off her son Thomas to everybody, and everybody was pleased. But the showing off of the son, though still within the soul's intent for experience, brought with it problems of attachment as time went on. Around Ida's age of 21 she bore a second son, and then a final daughter, which became problematic for Thomas, as he was no longer the center of attention. Thomas fretted about this change in family attention and he got into comparison issues about his own worth relative to that of his younger brother and sister. This brought forth frustration that his siblings were getting more attention than he got. As Thomas grew up into being a teenager, he began to work on trying to find out his own way within that of life. Now, being the older child of the family, and apparent heir to the family business, Thomas had more opportunity to travel with his father on business trips to the surrounding fiefdoms and gain experience not otherwise available in the home village. Thomas also saw that he had more options in life than that of his mother. Ida was going to be a mother and nothing else but a mother. But Thomas had other options. He could join the military or become a priest, or a vagabond bent on traveling around the country and gain new experiences everywhere he went. Or Thomas could become a merchant in some larger town or city where there was more opportunity. But this went against the mother's interest, where Ida sought to have Thomas marry locally, stay in the local area and be prepared to take care of her and Hans as they got older. So by the time of his age of 16 he began to learn his father's business of being a merchant, also involving some short-term travel to surrounding fiefdoms where he would meet other teenage girls of his own age. In these travels he learned all the ropes of the business and what was required to become that of a merchant. Hans was doing well at that time, having several horses and 2 carts, and father and son would often travel from fiefdom to fiefdom in the local area. Out of this, Thomas began to learn that the world was more than just that of one house or one place or one fiefdom or one way of being. His observation was that some places were more harsh than others. Other places were easier to be in, and that the rules of life seemed to differ from place to place. Perceived rules about having to stay in his birth village began to slip away. Although it was a bit confusing, he could see that he could begin to create his own rules of life, regardless of the plans and desires of Ida or others in his local society. As time went on, Hans became quite happy doing what he was doing, and this also developed for Thomas. Now, Thomas knew that this was supposed to lead to that of something else, but he did not know what it was. Thomas also began to change his feelings about his younger brother and sister, and his prior frustrations began to dissipate. Because Thomas was the older of the 3 and this afforded him more latitude in life. He could take over the family business and be successful enough to take care of himself, his parents, and a likely wife and family of his own. So there was a sense of security which he liked very well. Ida began to see value in this change in attitude in Thomas, and she saw his interest in taking over the family business and the act of increasing the family wealth and resultant sense of security. So, when other ideas of spirituality came up between Ida and Thomas speaking about maybe becoming a priest of something of that nature, Ida would find ways to sabotage the idea by suggesting that Thomas could help people by having more wealth and giving more to the poor. But that was never the actual practice of the Hans-Ida family, and the idea of Thomas entering the clergy never took off. As Thomas approached the age of 15 or 16, the connection with his mother Ida began to change, and he did not know where to take this change forward. This despite the earlier natural affinity between Ida and Thomas and the concerns around that of stability and safety in life. But he began to feel that Ida wanted Thomas to be around more for her purpose than that of his soul's intent for experiencing that of the larger world. At times Thomas would talk about joining the military and leaving the family business to his younger brother. Ida worked on sabotaging that idea. But as time went on, Thomas realized he had to make up his own mind and do so pretty quickly. He thought about what was he going to do in life. He thought about taking other options, but still found himself doing the same old patterns, being with the father, and not trying anything differently. He would talk with others about what he might do otherwise, but ideas of striking out on his own began to get a little bit scary. And so Thomas found this situation to be out of balance, especially with his relationship with his mother Ida. Thomas still saw his mother as supreme, but he began to see Ida as being controlling and manipulative. Ida would do everything she could to keep Thomas on track of staying where he was at. And Thomas did not join the military, or become a vagabond, or a priest. But at around the age of 18 he met a young woman, Hilda, from another fiefdom village on one of the father's business trips. He and Hilda got married and moved away to Hilda's village, some 100 kilometers away. Ida was highly against this marriage and relocation, even though Thomas became a merchant in that larger village and did well enough to have a family of 3. Ida turned her attention to the younger son. Communications in those times over longer distances was poor and really only happened as a consequence of merchant trade, there being no postal-like services. During his business travels, Thomas would sometimes reconnect with his father with updates on family news. Ida began to have a great sense of loss within herself with the departure of Thomas, and continued to focus on the younger brother as a replacement for the lost Thomas. Thomas and his family had a good life in the other fiefdom and all was largely satisfactory. It seemed to be very practical. A lot was created through general human attraction for other individuals. And so this was nice within its own self. Thomas began to create his own world for himself as a merchant. He would go to areas that his father would never go to because of distance considerations. And then everything began to change as he approached his age of 30. For his father and younger brother died of the Black Death plague. His mother Ida and younger sister also contracted the plague, but survived. So, all of a sudden, Thomas realized he was the responsible one, that, in that awareness he was supposed to go back and take care of his mother and sister. He was in conflict because he had created his own life and was doing well, but the sense of responsibility took over and he uprooted his family from their long-established home and life in a larger town to travel far into the poorer countryside. He essentially took over the family business as a merchant and looked after his mother. They all lived in a different household, the place of birth home being burnt down out of fears of plague contamination. So the mother became the mother-in-law living in the home of Thomas and wife Hilda. This all worked out, but in reality Thomas had done so well in the larger town that he could have hired someone to move to Ida's village and take care of Ida remotely. Nevertheless, Thomas and Hilda and children being in Ida's village created a sense of stability and safety for Ida. Despite this sense of stability, Ida became out of balance within her own self. While she had a touch of the plague and did not die, the infection did affect her brain and she began to move more deeply into a sense of paranoia around that of security, and that things were being taken away from her, and a part of the trauma was the loss of her husband Hans and second son. So now everything devolved into a full-blown place of control and manipulation. In other words, Ida began to get more and more angry and jealous of Hilda and would get into fights with Hilda all the time. Ida still had the old idea that the older one had more power and that Hilda needed to be more obedient to Ida. And so here was this struggle again. Thomas tried to create a sense of balance by explaining to Ida that everything was fine and that nobody was taking her things. And that Hilda was not trying to push Ida out of the house, but the struggle to do so was endless. Because, again, by this time Ida had lost the ability to make conscious decisions. Everything for Ida was within that of patterns consistent for that particular time. And Ida continued this life of paranoia until she died around 55 years of age, from issues of a lung disorder. With the death of Ida, Thomas felt a great sense of sadness and relief at the very same time because Ida had been so out of control for so many years. And it was such an emotional drain upon Thomas in trying to always talk Ida into something that was supposed to be better for her. Even when her mind could not do anything with that particular information because the paranoia was now that of the paranoia. Trauma was that of the trauma, and there was no way to really fix that or balance that out during that particular time and place. In time, some 3 years after Ida's passing, Thomas dies from a head injury related to his merchant business. He has a business with several carts, and one day while transporting some lumber, a great wind flips a board off of a cart and the board struck Thomas in the head and he died from the injury. This happened around his age of 38, leaving Hilda a widow and the children fatherless. Leaving the 10th century behind. Fast forward another 11 centuries, passing over and through many other incarnations, marriages, families, and careers, the reincarnations of Ida and Thomas come into contact again, though only through that of technology. Alan, a reincarnation certainly of Thomas, but also many other incarnations, creates a lifetime for himself around that of technology, building a website, a social media presence on Facebook, and several YouTube channels. Out of a question from his cousin Tim, Alan makes a posting both on his Facebook profile page about a story on his 1947 YouTube channel about what it means for him to be both a psychic and a reader. Lo and behold, Ida's like reincarnation of Caroline sees the posting and she initiates a connection. With respect to the significance of that of the past or that of the present is once again, these two begin to bring forward an interaction within the present time to, in a sense, review that of the past. And to also see how there are similarities within that of the present time, that for them to have any meaningful connection, each one must be equally conscious. So for Alan, he needs to understand his own consciousness more, his motivations and intentions. What are his created actions for? In the past life of 10th century Germany, his intention was to create his own life, but at the same time, sometimes please that of other individuals when they had a type of an emotional control over him. Alan has made some improvements, obviously over time, but still sometimes gets stuck with that of the ideas of what makes one happy within that of life. And what is he supposed to do within that of life about the relationship between himself and Caroline within that of the present time? It's still coming from this idea that he is supposed to do something, that he is supposed to make something happen because it's going to make an improvement in the differences between maleness and femaleness, those kinds of things. But underneath all of this, there's still that of this other connection from that of the past, that although there's a sense of connection, the roles are all gone with respect to the past life to the present time, but still remain a little bit of that distant memory. And so that seems to be the initiating connecting link, though there's not much one can do about this. In other words, for Caroline there is a sense of loss within her own self about consciousness over what is the purpose of life? What is she supposed to do? And although she has a type of interest upon some more meaningful things, she still gets back into that of security and loss of things that have occurred to her within the present lifetime. Not just that of the past life, when she lost a husband and youngest son, and then needed this great sense of dependency upon Thomas and that of Alan. Some of that past flavor still holds true within that of this present time. So, what to do, with answers from Spirit? The suggestion here is for Caroline to realize that to deepen the connection with Alan, she is going to have to make a shift within her own consciousness. Otherwise, she will just be playing out old paradigms, old ways of the past Ida and Ida's thoughts of how to be within that of life. And even though they have not worked for her, even within that of the present, there's still a pattern within that of consciousness. And that would be that of the reliance that somebody else is going to take care of her, that somebody else is going to make her happy in some particular way. When on an intrinsic level, Caroline has not quite deepened into that place where all things come from her own self. It's not the outer world that makes her happy or secure. It is her own consciousness that counts. We suggest for her deepening through drawing on inner resources to understand she is a divine being incarnate. Caroline is not just a female that looks a certain way or acts a certain way. That's just personality that is going on. And so the more that she understands this, and she does have the ability to understand this in this particular lifetime, that she can create better options for herself. At the same time, it would be very good for her to have some kind of counseling around the emotional energies she experiences between herself as a female in this lifetime and that of males within that of the present lifetime. To understand there's actually a deeper nature going on within whomever that she meets. Caroline wants balance. She wants to find true happiness for her own self, but it's still not within that of others where happiness and balance is going to come from. The suggestion for Caroline is meditation and contemplation to bring out more resources because she has them there. The desires get covered up through principles around security and control within herself. It's just something to examine within herself. The suggestion for Alan is that he is still responsible for his own self and that he has no obligations as regards Caroline. Alan is not here to rescue anybody, but sometimes that quality from the very distant past begins to creep into himself. No different within that of the past life where when the father Hans and the brother died in that lifetime. Alan Thomas felt that he had to rescue his mother. It demanded it. But no more. But the observation is that he Thomas was not necessarily knowing what Thomas was getting into when he made that choice for himself, and it made for a very, very difficult 5 years, even though Thomas had other options. Thomas had been making enough business money within the fiefdom that he could have paid somebody to be with Ida, to take care of Ida, and so forth, or send money or send things in that particular fashion. But Thomas did not hold on to that, nor even think of that particular idea. The observation here suggests that of the connection between Caroline and Alan is still based a little bit upon the past and some neediness within that of the present time. But again, there's still a place of exploration that he wants to see and to understand there's something deeper always going on within that of the experience. It's not that of the superficial levels that get in the way. It's just learning how to let them go their own way to keep seeing the broader perspective and making changes within himself, rather than wanting someone else or the other one, whoever the other one is, male or female, to make one happy in any particular way. Letting go of that particular illusion would be very beneficial, but it will not occur overnight. This could be a long-term process within this kind of experiencing. Conclusions. This is largely a true story, both in past and present as verbalized through a past life crossings reading between Alan and Robert Blond of Sedalia, Colorado. Some names like Hans and Hilda and locales like Warnitz have been added to assist the process of the storytelling. For many listeners or readers desire to have a name attached to a place or person. An attempt has been made to keep the story text closely aligned with the spoken words of Robert while he is in trance state. Alan was given an opportunity at the conclusion of the reading to ask some questions. Alan asked if Caroline had any past life involvement with his Atlantis activities and all that happened up to the fall. The answer was no, with the further understanding that Caroline did have prior incarnations in Atlantis, just not at the same time as Alan did. Do enjoy, give a like, subscribe, and tell your friends about this story.